It's headlines and fun, true crime tales and a wild rerun. Bits of news to brighten your day. In the weirdest, wackiest, pettiest expressway. Scandals, gators, space coast too. Crimes that baffle and headlights askew. When the world gets dark, we bring the cheer. Newsy nuggets, the good, the grim, the weird is here.
Hey guys, it's Mo, and we do have more, at least a different perspective on the Kohberger case. I wanted to bring you guys because I think this might be relatively something that maybe other people aren't looking at, but experts warn Idaho's murder plea might, be a dangerous calculation or a long game sort of maneuver by Bryan Kohberger. Regardless of how you feel about this, I think that, again, this potentiality for many, many years of appeals and that kind of thing is what the prosecutors were trying to avoid, but there are unforeseen issues that may come up, such as the Menendez brothers, who were adjudicated guilty of taking the lives of their parents from their Beverly Hills mansion in 1989, were sentenced to life without parole years later, but they were never supposed to see the light of day again. However, under a new California law and an increasingly more liberal state, that changed. A judge reduced their sentences and made them immediately eligible for parole after a controversial hearing this year, kick-started by a prosecutor who failed his re-election bid, largely because critics viewed him as too soft on crime. Now, for one former investigator, that's a bad omen for the victims of Bryan Kohberger, a criminology PhD student who has confessed to taking the lives of four University of Idaho graduates in a home invasion stabbing scheme. He's playing the long game in this plea deal, said Dr. Chris Mohandi, a forensic psychologist whose past work includes the cases involving O.J. Simpson and the North Hollywood bank robbery shootout. If you take death off the table, he literally has no skin in the game. There's no downside for him. Now, Kohberger agreed to a plea deal last week. He admitted to stabbing each student multiple times in a premeditated attack, but did not explain himself or give any, motives or reasons. I know that there is split opinion on this. I have gotten several messages of how insensitive I am for, hoping that the families get, and again, I would hope this would be with consultation with the families, to get a confession of what happened if that is what they want. I can only imagine that they just want an answer of why. Why did you do this? And as sad as it is, evil doesn't need a reason. But if the families are wanting this, then I hope that they get that at the sentencing on the 23rd. Now, he didn't explain himself. We didn't get any motives. We didn't get anything out of that. And again, you guys know I didn't deep dive into this case. I didn't know a lot about it. But from the reaction of the state prosecutor, it was ugly, is all I can gather from that. I'm not a big, true crime. I want to see all the photos and things like that. In fact, I rarely ever want to see photos. And it just, if they need it, then I want them to have it. Now, it does save taxpayers money and requires Kohberger to forfeit his right to ever appeal his conviction and or move for a future sentence reduction. The end result could be substantially stricter than the trial would have delivered. Not only are juries unpredictable, Kohberger would have likely spent decades appealing a conviction and a death sentence, but Idaho still falls under the federal government's historically liberal Court of Appeals. So it really is, yes, juries are unpredictable. It only takes one particular juror to not like a prosecutor, to not like the law or anything else. I mean, we always say that, Baker and I will cover trials. I mean, he's usually doing them current time, so he doesn't know the ending, whereas I generally do them behind the scene or behind the times and know the ending. But there have been plenty of cases where we have been just shocked at what the jury sees or doesn't see, or what they chose to, pick out from the entire trial as to be their focus. It's very interesting to see all the different things that a jury can do, but they are unpredictable. They are, something that, you don't know when you get jury if they're going to be, even amenable to the death penalty, because some people aren't. So it's very, very different, and figuring out, again, will your Tate, I'm not doing anything on the Tate brothers. Will your state do a sort of criminal justice reform trajectory, or will it have a more draconian trajectory? It's something that you aren't going to know, and could again be something that a lot of the families are looking at and are worrying about now that this plea deal has been reached. So, that again, it can be an issue, and I never thought in my lifetime that I would see, the Menendez brothers get anywhere close to freedom. I mean, I vaguely remember the story. I wasn't a true crimer yet. I was still reading Little Mermaid books and hoping desperately to become a Little Mermaid when I grew up. Now, while parents of victims Ethan Chapin, 20 years old, and Madison Mogan, 21, have publicly supported the deal, Kaylee Gonclavy's family called the potential death penalty a mere illusion in a scathing statement voicing their opposition to any leniency or deal that would have been offered to Bryan Kohberger. And I've covered those. And again, I'm not asking you to like them, but give them some grace. I wouldn't know the heart rate and pain of losing a child, and don't wish that on my worst enemy. The 20-year-old Xana Kernoodle's family did not respond to any messages or, put out any statement. Now, giving up his right to an appeal could also wind up being an illusion years down the road, Mahunde also warned. Look at all these high-profile cases that we've seen come up lately after many, many years. The long game is we're not going to be able to appeal this case, but the truth is there is always some reason down the road when the law changes, when case law changes, etc. Now, Kohberger and his lawyers know all that. He pointed to the Menendez brother, the Manson family, and Scott Peterson. Convicted, sentenced to death, some of them commuted, and then they're up begging for parole. Now, victims also pass away. The public memory, public consciousness moves on. This is now more a footnote than a current news session, kind of thing. Are these attitudes towards Bryan Kohberger going to remain the same, or are there going to be some, laws that are put on for maybe good things, but have unintended consequences of making Bryan Kohberger eligible for certain things that he should never be eligible for? Only one uncle, Milton Anderson, of the Menendez brothers, publicly opposed their release. He died just days before the judge reduced their sentences at the age of 90. Now, Kohberger, who pled guilty last week, is due in front of Judge Stephen Hippler later this month for formal sentencing. On November 13th, 2022, the 4 victims were stabbed to death in a 4 a.m. massacre in an off-campus house in Moscow, Idaho, but all but Kernoodle may have been asleep when the attack started. Now, there is no known motive and rampant speculation about what happened. More than 6 weeks later, police announced the arrest of Kohberger at his parents' home in Pennsylvania's Pocono Mountains. He was 28 at the time and a student at Washington State University, which is about 10 miles from the crime scene, where he was studying for a PhD in criminology. At the bloody crime scene, police found one key piece of evidence, a forgotten knife sheath with Kohberger's DNA on the snap. Now, while his background raises some questions and red flags, the deal is not expected to provide any answers. I think it's a big mistake not to insist that he come clean with what he did, because then down the road he could always say, I never admitted anything. It was just circumstantial and I was forced to do this, Mohanty said. Now, prosecutors could have demanded answers as part of the deal, but it is unclear whether either Kohberger objected or rejected that, or that hadn't been part of the negotiation. In response to, reduction of sentencing laws, other states have moved in the opposite direction. Now, Tennessee passed a truth in sentencing law in 2022 to ensure that the suspect faces penalties that the state prescribes for violent crimes, and so victims can find justice and peace without the threat of a surprise reversal down the road. Time will only be on his side, Mohanty said of Kohberger, who is expected to serve 4 consecutive life sentences plus an additional 10 years. But prison can carry other risks. Now, I do want to look into the prison that Bryan is going to be going to. I know other people have covered it. It is very, very, rough, let's just say. And I know y'all are going to get tired of this bit, but the, jar of F's full of hair thingies has hair thingies but no F's. So I'm not feeling too bad about Mr. Kohberger. That being said, I do worry, and I do think that this is an angle that maybe some people haven't thought about. The fact that we do have these cases resurging from the 80s and 90s that are getting, pushes for leniency and things like that. Victims, family members, unfortunately pass away. They are no longer there to advocate. I mean, look at the every 2-year torture that Susan Smith is probably going to put her ex-husband and all the family through every 2 years because she feels she deserves parole. Now, I understand Bryan Kohberger is different, but laws are ever changing, ever shifting. Case law, they come out with new case law every year. So it is a sort of perspective that I think that a lot of people haven't taken into account, and is something that is kind of worrisome. If the, foundational rules change, could Kohberger, end up with even more leniency than some people perceive he already has gotten? But I'm not a doctorologist or an expertologist or a lawologist, so I'm just taking, experts and kind of extrapolating things that I see in normal life. But as always, be kind to yourself, be kind to others, but have a sassy mouth and carry a can of bitch fire, because kindness doesn't equal doormat, y'all. Bye, you guys.